There are some betrayals so grievous they're unforgivable, that they leave a lasting vengeance in someone's heart, so deep that it can defy the grave. Find out today.
The road died with the mule. The first arrow took it in the throat. It made a sound like a man trying to swallow his own scream. The beast staggered, legs folding beneath it, and the lead wagon lurched sideways in the mud. A second shaft came at once, punching through the driver's shoulder. He pitched from the bench with a wet slap, reins flying loose, and for half a heartbeat, the whole column kept moving, because men and horses and wagons did not yet understand that the road had turned against them. Then the whistle came. High and sharp as a bird call. Another answered, lower. Then a third, farther off, too well placed to be chance, and too coldly timed to be boys at play. So Martin Lannet had heard whistles like that before in the hills west of Lannisport, when children played at being outlaws among gullies and alder thickets. This was no game. This was a language. "Shields!" he roared. "Up! Up!" Steel scraped free. Men cursed. Hooves churned the King's Road into soup. Rain had fallen since dawn, steady and patient, and the Riverlands track had become a ribbon of brown porridge studded with stones. The wagons groaned. Horses blew white steam. The air smelled of wet wool, wet leather, wet fear. Martin's palfrey shied when the mule collapsed. He hauled hard on the reins, swore, dragged the beast's head around, and saw the lead wagon half buried at an angle, one wheel swallowed in mud, while blood poured between the dying mule's teeth. A second wagon slammed into it with a crack of wood. The whole column bunched tight. Too tight. Perfect. His mouth tasted of copper as he looked down the road and understood, too late, that the ambush had already chosen the ground, the weather, and the moment. In the Riverlands, silence was often the loudest warning of all. "Form!" Martin shouted. But the road was too narrow and the world too neatly arranged against him. To the left lay a flooded field running toward a black ribbon of river. To the right rose a soggy bank snarled with roots, thorn and willow. Trees pressed close enough to hide 100 men. Worse, they were too quiet. The Riverlands were never quiet anymore. Even the crows made noise. "Archers, find them!" So Willis called from somewhere behind, young enough still to believe a shouted order could pull enemies out of shadow. Martin felt eyes on him. His men always looked to him first. He wore the red cloak. He wore the lion brooch. Sir Fawley Prester had once said of him, "This one brings men home." That had been true on other roads, in other wars, before the rivers had learned new names for drowning. Another arrow hissed past Martin's cheek and vanished into a shield with a hard thunk. "No banners," he muttered. "No horns. Only whistles." Then the road ahead erupted. Not with fire, with men. They rose from ditch and brush, as if the earth itself had grown fists and knives. Grey cloaks, brown cloaks, green so dark it looked black in the rain. Faces half hidden beneath hoods, patched helms, dripping hair. Bows in their hands, axes, cudgels. One man held a pitchfork like a farmer come to collect a debt. At their center stood a man in a yellow cloak gone ragged and old, the color of spoiled straw. Broad, heavy, smiling, though there was no warmth in it. His nose had been broken once and badly mended. Lem, Martin thought at once. Lemon Cloak. He had heard the name beside campfires and in muttered curses, always spoken the way men spoke of wolves, with contempt in the mouth and prayer in the heart. Beside Lem stepped a shorter man in a dented helm. He raised one hand as though greeting a guest instead of trapping prey. "Easy now," called the man in the dented helm. his voice carrying through rain and mud. "Easy. You've come far in bad weather." "You're bold," Martin shouted back, buying time with breath. "Attacking Lannister men on a king's road." "A king's road?" The man laughed softly. "Is it? Which king built it? Which king keeps it safe? Which king eats the bread along it and pays the small folk when you trample their fields?" More outlaws stepped into view as he spoke, men in the trees, men in the ditches, men on the rise above, bows already drawn, arrowheads steady as judgment. There were more of them than Martin had counted at first glance, and worse, they moved like men who knew where every horse would shy and every frightened soldier would try to run. "Sir Martin," Sir Willis said behind him, voice tight. "I know what we are," Martin snapped. "Trapped, outnumbered, knee-deep in muck." Then his eyes found the wagon he truly feared losing. The prisoner wagon sat mid-column, iron-bound and ugly, drawn by two shaggy draft horses with rolling white eyes. Rain made the bars gleam. Inside sat a man in a soaked cloak, hands chained at his waist. Edmure Tully, Lord of Riverrun once, prisoner since. He looked thinner than the last time Martin had seen him, and older too, as though captivity had leaned on him day and night the way winter leaned on trees. Beside him sat a girl in a dark hood, not a girl, Martin reminded himself. The letters never called her that. The bride, the westerling, the young wolf's widow. Names like shackles. Her wrists were bound as well, though she looked scarcely heavy enough to anchor in a strong wind. Her hood stayed low. Martin had never once seen her full face during the journey. His orders had been clear about looking. His orders had been clear about everything. Without thinking, he touched the packet beneath his breastplate, 2 letters sealed in oilskin, one courteous, one monstrous. A man can ignore danger. He cannot ignore the truth when it speaks in a gentle voice. Lem Lemoncloak stepped forward, mud sucking at his boots. "We want what you've stolen," he said mildly, "and we want the folk you've taken. Then you can go on your way, wet and hungry, like every other bastard in the Riverlands." "And if we refuse?" Martin asked. The dented helm tipped his head. "Then you'll die here. Then you'll be robbed. Then you'll be fed to crows. That's the order of things." "That's not order," Sir Willis spat. "River justice," said a new voice, and that voice arrived with music. A man in a patchwork cloak sprang up atop the fallen mule's wagon as if it were a mummer's stage. A harp hung from his shoulder. Rainwater dripped from the strings. He struck a bright chord anyway, cheerful as mockery. "Oh, the lion sat fat on a hill of gold," he sang, "and the river ran red where the hungry rolled." "Tom," Lem said, though not unkindly. Thomas Evans only grinned and kept grinning, because a grin was a blade too. Something cold settled behind Martin's ribs. A song. On a king's road, in the rain, while men bled into mud. For one mad instant, he thought of old tales from Lannisport, greenwood outlaws robbing fat lords and tossing pennies to barefoot children. But this was no bright song from summer. These woods stank of smoke, rot, and graves. These thieves had seen too much. "Enough," Martin called. "You want gold? Take the wagons. Leave the prisoners." Lem's smile did not move. "No." The dented helm raised 2 fingers. The trees answered. Arrows came down not in a panicked storm, but in chosen shots. measured shots. One horse screamed and toppled with Sir Willis beneath it. Another arrow drove through a man's thigh. Another pinned shield arm to shoulder. Not killing, not yet. Herding. Martin felt the understanding strike him like a mace. They were driving his men the way hunters drove deer toward nets. The cruelest trap is the one that leaves you alive long enough to understand it. "Back!" Martin shouted. "Back, you fools! Get off the road!" Into where? The flooded field? The rise where Bowman waited? There was no direction left that did not already belong to someone else. One rider on the far right tried the slope anyway. He managed 3 strides before a rope snapped tight across his chest and yanked him backward. He struck the mud hard, helm ringing. Men burst from brush and fell on him with clubs and fists. They did not stab him. They dragged him. Martin's stomach turned. It would have been easier if they were butchers. Easier if they were beasts. Beasts did not lay ropes. Beasts did not choose when not to kill you. He drew his sword. Steel slid free with a wet hiss. Then came another whistle, low, close. Martin turned his head. A boy sat in the alder branches 10 feet away, so near Martin could see the freckles across his nose. He held a bow steady, arrow aimed at Martin's eye. His mouth was set in a hard line that belonged on no child. Martin froze. "You don't want to do that," he said, hating how calm his voice sounded. "You'll live longer if you don't." The boy blinked rain from his lashes. "I don't care." That was the Riverlands in 6 words. The hooded girl in the prisoner wagon lifted her face a fraction. Not enough for him to see her features, but enough to glimpse the pale line of her jaw. Her bound shoulders trembled once. Cold, fear, fury, Martin could not tell. Edmure Tully stared out between the bars at the outlaws and the rain with something like weary relief. "You're stealing us," he said. "How flattering." Tom O'Sevens struck another false sprite chord. "We're liberating you," he sang back. "And you'll thank us later, my lord." Sometimes surrender begins long before a man drops his sword. Lem took another step toward the wagons. "Sir Martin," he called, "you've got choices, and that's a gift. Lay down your steel. Give us the keys. Walk away breathing." "My lord," Sir Willis began, but the fear in his voice had turned plain now, naked as the rain. The boy in the tree did not tremble, did not blink, did not look away. Martin felt the letters pressing against his chest like hot stones. "Bring them west. Keep them alive. Keep her belly still." He swallowed hard enough to hurt. "Keys," he called to the man beside the wagon. The fellow hesitated. "Keys," Martin barked, and at last the man fumbled them free with shaking fingers. Lem's smile widened by the width of a blade. "Good," he said. "Good. See, we can all be reasonable." Martin lowered his sword slowly, then drove it point first into the mud. Rain ran down the steel like tears. One by one his men followed, some cursing, some white-faced, some looking almost grateful that the choice had been made for them. When the last blade went down, the dented helm clapped once. The outlaws moved in, quickly but not chaotically, with practiced hands. They stripped men of knives, axes, coin, spare cord, even belt buckles that might be turned into weapons. They took purses, rings, Lannister-stitched saddle blankets. They moved with the crisp efficiency of soldiers who had learned hunger better than drill. Lem went himself to the prisoner wagon. He took the keys, opened the iron door, and pulled it wide like a man opening a cellar after winter. Edmure blinked at him. You smell like onions. Better onions than lions. 2 men helped Edmure down into the mud. His legs nearly failed him, but he caught himself on the bars and laughed once, short and bitter. And her? Martin asked before he could stop himself. The hooded girl still did not look at him. Lem glanced back. You've orders about her. Martin said nothing. Then Lem cut her bonds. This was the moment the old songs turned ugly and became true again. The girl took Lem's offered hand only after a long heartbeat. She climbed down from the wagon like someone stepping off a cliff and daring the earth to catch her. When her boots touched mud, she swayed once. The girl raised her head only a fraction. Martin saw no more than a pale chin, wet strands of hair, and the set of a jaw hard as stone. She did not thank Lem. She did not look at Martin. She only stood there breathing, as if freedom were a thing she no longer trusted. Thomas Evans leaned toward her with exaggerated solemnity. "My lady," he said, "permit me to apologize for the inconvenience. It has been a dreadful week for kidnappings. We really must organize better." She did not laugh. "Worth a try?" By then the outlaws were already emptying the wagons. Not everything, only what mattered. Grain sacks, salt fish, cloth, wine, iron hasp chests. One man pried open a lid and the silver within. "Careful!" warned the dented helm. "That's not for you!" "And that," Tom announced, hopping down from his wagon stage, "is why we call it charity, lads, and not thievery. Thievery sounds so unseptonly." Martin watched in a kind of stunned disgust, as men he would once have called rabble lifted Lannister wealth and passed it not into hidden caches, but hand to hand into the willows. Then the women came out. Thin women, mud-splashed women. Children, too, with eyes too large for their faces. They drifted from the trees like ghosts. And the outlaws gave them sacks, bolts of cloth, strips of salted meat. One little girl clutched brown wool to her chest as if it were a doll. Rob the rich, feed the poor. A song, a tale. Only the mule still gurgled in the road. Only blood still made a pink little stream through the mud. It can feel like mockery when it is offered by the man who has beaten you. When the wagons had been stripped of what mattered, Lem came back to Martin. "You get to live," he said. "That's a mercy. Don't waste it." "You're letting us go?" Sir Willis demanded. "After attacking the king's men?" Tom laughed aloud. "Which king is that today? I lose track." Lem ignored him. "We're leaving you your boots," he told Martin. "We're leaving you your lives. We're leaving you a long walk with nothing to eat but pride. If you're clever, you'll learn something on that walk." Rain stung Martin's eyes. "You'll die," he said, because men always said that when they had nothing else left. Lem's smile gentled in a way that made it crueler. "Maybe," he said, "but not today. Today's forgiving." The dented helm flashed another signal. At once, the outlaws began to melt back into willow and alder, taking their prisoners with them. Edmure Tully, Jane Westerling, and old Nan, all swallowed one by the wet green shadows. Thomas Evans lingered only long enough for a mocking bow and a flourish of his harp. "Try not to step on any caltrops," he called cheerfully. "We've been careless lately." Then he too was gone. Martin stood in the rain with empty wagons, dead animals, disarmed men, and mud sucking at his boots. Without the silver and prisoners, the road seemed wider, Meaner. Emptier. Silence settled. Not peace. Never peace. Something else. He heard it first as a faint sound like breath moving through reeds. Low, rolling, rhythmic. Huff, huff, huff. The horses felt it before the men did. They stamped and tossed their heads. Then shapes moved in the flooded field to the left. Grey shapes. Too many. Wolves, so Willis breathed. No one answered him.
The real horror came only after the men with bows were gone. The direwolf stood at the field's edge, huge as a nightmare, dark as wet river stone. Her shoulders rolled beneath rain-slick fur with calm, sovereign strength. A white scar slashed across her muzzle. Her eyes burned amber gold. Sir Martin Lannet had never seen such a beast. No man of the West had. Yet he knew the stories. Every campfire had whispered them. Every frightened groom and half-drunk free-rider had added teeth to them. A wolf pack in the Riverlands, larger than any pack had a right to be. A she-wolf leading them. A monster that hunted men as men hunted deer. And worse than that, the northern superstition. The dead Starks come back as wolves. Men laughed at such things in daylight. They laughed louder when there was wine. Lannisters did not fear old wives' tales from frozen keeps and wolf-haunted woods. But the rain had drowned the daylight. The bows had taken the brave men first. And now the dead lay open in the mud while that great she-wolf watched them with eyes too bright, too knowing, too much like judgment. She did not look at the mule, did not look at the horses. She looked at the men, at Martin. He felt, absurdly and terribly, that she knew him, knew the lion cloak, knew the brooch, knew what had been written in the letters against his chest. A smaller wolf broke from the pack and darted forward, snapping at a soldier's calf. The man screamed and stumbled, weaponless. Then the pack surged. It was not a charge in the way cavalry charged. It was a flood. Grey bodies hit the road like fast water. Teeth flashed white. One man went down with a cry that turned wet halfway through. Another tried to scramble into a wagon and was dragged backward by the heel, shrieking through mud. A horse went down screaming as a wolf ripped its belly open and vanished in steam and blood. "Form up!" Martin shouted, because shouting was what men did when the world became teeth. No one formed. They ran. They scattered. They died. Sir Willis managed half a curse before a wolf took his throat in one clean motion. Men slipped in muck and vanished beneath snapping jaws. The dire wolf herself did not lunge wildly. She paced, watched, turned her head once, and half the pack shifted with her. That was the worst of it. Not hunger, not madness. Command. The pack killed as though answering a will. Martin had heard men say wolves were only beasts. He had said it himself. Beasts could be trapped. Beasts could be skinned. Beasts did not remember banners. They did not choose roads. They did not come after lions carrying letters through the rain. But this one watched him as if some cold thing behind her amber eyes had known his house long before he was born. For the first time that day, Sir Martin Lannet forgot rank, forgot letters, forgot kings, and remembered only that he was made of meat. And somewhere in the wet dark of his mind, An old campfire whisper rose again. The dead Starks come back as wolves. Martin ran. He did not remember choosing to. One instant he stood in the road as a knight with a lion brooch, and the next he was splashing into the flooded field, water to his knees, reeds slashing at his face while men screamed behind him. A wolf hit him from the side. He went down face first in cold water. Jaws clamped onto his shoulder and yanked. Pain flashed white through him. He screamed, thrashed, found a rock with one desperate hand and smashed it blindly into fur. The jaws loosened. He rolled over in time to see another wolf's mouth opening, teeth pale as bone in the rain. He swung again. This time the beast yelped and backed away. Martin scrambled up, half crawling, half swimming, and plunged deeper into the reeds. Mud dragged at his boots. His breath came ragged and animal. All around him the rain made sky, field, and river one endless grey bruise. Behind him the killing still went on. But then it shifted. He heard it before he understood it. A short, sharp call. Not human, not quite. A wolf's whistle. The pack answered. The slaughter turned away like a storm changing course. Martin did not stop until his lungs burned and his legs gave way beneath him on a muddy bank screened by drooping willow branches. He lay there, listening as the screams on the road thinned, then faded, then were swallowed by rain and river. At last he lifted his head. Nothing. Mist, reeds, water. The wolves were gone. Only the river remained, black and swift, carrying blood and cloth and names away, as if none of them had mattered. Martin spat mud and coughed river water. His shoulder throbbed where teeth had bruised and pierced him. His left hand tingled numb and strange. Still, he tried to stand. He managed 3 stumbling steps. Then he heard voices in the willows, close, low, human. He turned, and the rope was already around his wrists. Rope bit his wrists before he could raise his arms. Someone kicked his legs out from under him. He hit the mud hard, tasted iron and rain, and rough hands hauled him upright again before he could think to struggle. A hooded figure stepped from the willows. For one foolish heartbeat, Martin thought it was Lem returned. Then he saw the throat. Not a throat. A ruin. Puckered flesh. Purple scars. Dark stitches where living skin had no right to be stitched. A wound so terrible it seemed less healed than denied. Lady Stoneheart. Martin's mouth went dry. He had heard of her the way men heard of winter, first as rumor, then as warning, then as truth too dreadful to admit aloud. Yet here she stood in rain and mud, still as a grave marker, while water ran from her hood in thin little streams. Around her stood more the Brotherhood, silent now, grim. The dented helm, a hard-mouthed woman with a knife at her hip. The freckled bow boy from the tree still staring without a blink. "You lived," said the man in the dented helm, sounding almost disappointed. Martin tried to speak. I didn't." He did not know what he meant to deny. The ambush? The letters? The war? His own part in any of it? Lady Stoneheart raised a hand. That was all. The outlaws fell so quiet that the river itself seemed to hush in answer. She studied Martin with eyes no longer fit for any living woman. Dark wells, bottomless, full of old grief turned rancid and sharp. Then slowly she lifted 2 fingers and tapped them against her ruined throat. A gesture, final, certain. The man in the dented helm nodded. "A rope," he said. "No," Martin croaked, voice cracking. "No, listen!" But they were already dragging him beneath a willow branch, and the noose was already rising over his head like a question to which the Riverlands knew only one answer. Death was not the end of his chapter. That was the horror. They kicked his boots from under him, and Martin Lannet dangled, choking. The world narrowed at once to rope, rain, and blind panic. He clawed at the noose, kicked at empty air, felt his vision burst into stars. Beneath him, the river waited, dark as an open mouth. He thought wildly of the letters beneath his breastplate, wax seals, courtesies, commands, how paper softened and tore when it got wet. Then the blackness took him. When he woke, it was to cold. Not morning cold, not rain cold. The cold of stone cellars and drowned places. He lay on his back, unable to remember breathing. A face hovered over him beneath a hood. Lady Stoneheart. Her mouth was torn and wrong, lips split apart by death and river and whatever cruel will had dragged her back. She leaned down. Martin tried to scream, but no sound came. Her swollen hands gripped his jaw and forced it open. Then she kissed him. Not a kiss fit for songs, a cold, wet press of ruined mouth to living mouth, tasting of river rot and the grave. Something passed from her into him then, not breath, not truly, but will. Grief made weight, hatred given motion, his chest convulsed. Black water burst from him in a choking gush, as though he had swallowed the river itself. He gagged, coughed, clawed air back into his lungs, and the first breath burned like fire. His eyes flew open. Everything was too sharp. Rain like nails, leaves like knives, the river whispering inside his skull. Stoneheart drew back and stared. He stared back. Alive. Not alive. At last she raised one hand and pointed west, to the road, the war, the work yet unfinished. Martin tried to speak. What came out was the sound of wet cloth tearing. The outlaws watched in silence. No one smiled. Far off, a wolf howled, long and low, like a horn for the dead. Lady Stoneheart turned and began to walk. Martin Lannet, captain, captive, corpse, lurched after her on shaking limbs, drawn by a rope no eye could see. Behind them the river rolled on, and winter came, soft-footed as a wolf.